Hello, this is the second video, and maybe I'm yelling a little too much. This is the second video in adjusting the weighted average cost of capital for the tax effects of interest. Now, last time I showed you some formulas and some of these horrible articles which go through this, and I hopefully demonstrated last time, and the key point was that if you make certain adjustments, you can apply the WACC just like you always do, as long as you get the cost of equity right. And this cost of equity is an observed number. This is what you get from the equity beta. And you can get exactly the same number if you want to call it the adjusted present value method, which is not exactly kind of how that adjusted present value method is applied, as long as you adjust the cost of equity. And when you do all of those, I'm reviewing, so if you looked at these videos in consecutive order, I apologize for kind of reviewing a little, but we get the same. We're supposed to get an increase in the value of debt because our value of debt went down as the tax effect of the interest reduces our fixed obligation, and that fixed obligation is directly related to debt. The only tiny case in which it wouldn't be is when the gearing would get so high and the taxes would go down to zero and you couldn't even defer the taxes and take an NOL, and then, okay, fine, the tax effect isn't exactly equal, but any other assumption is madness. This is just directly related to the cost of debt. Please don't get silly like that and say, oh, this is some kind of different cash flow that doesn't have the same risk characteristics as interest on the debt itself. The tax effect of debt, it's directly related to it. I'm pressing Shift Control P here, okay. Now, the next thing we want to do is apply this kind of idea in the real world. How can we apply this? Okay, so we've done this. Now, I want to show that once you have the idea right, you can write down a couple of formulas and start applying the formulas. Okay, so now let's go into the, here's the kind of formula for, once we have the, if we're using, here, I'm going to make a formula while we're on the video. We can say that the cost of the excuse me for stuttering, the cost of the unlevered equity, the unlevered all equity cost is the weighted cost of debt and the weighted cost of equity. And I said, well, that's the cost of debt, KD, plus the cost of equity. And then what we do is, if we look and see that the balance sheet, adjusted for market value, of course, has the, stop stuttering, has the value of debt at the value the providers of funds measure it at, rather than the value it is to you, which is different because you get a tax deduction on this and you don't for equity. And again, that's just a standard kind of thing, and it's correct. We could also, Control D, put, I'm just going to call this one net debt. So instead of putting all this silliness about gross debt, we'll just put net debt, and we'll call it net capital. That is differentiated capital. I can spell. Plus the equity times the net capital divided by. Notice that the denominator, this 1,000 is different than this 1,240. This is all you have to know. Then we can do the same thing for the cost of equity, and that's not very difficult. You do a tiny little bit of algebra, you bring the cost of equity to this side, and then you divide it by the equity capital. So you say, well, the cost of debt equity is if we know the unlevered cost of capital, you put the cost of debt times the net debt, that's net of tax debt divided by the net capital, and you divide that by the equity divided by the net capital. So when you're working through all of these equations that unlever and re-level their debt, you can call it Hamada. Now I'm going to brag about something. I had long meetings with Hamada back in the 80s about divesting a utility company, but you don't care about that. But there's some kind of Hamada formula. He was a nice guy, but they have this thing that seems to be named after him, this Hamada adjustment or something. So, heck of it, he's very famous. He's, I'm sure, much smarter than me. You can do the same thing with beta on the unlevered debt. You can call this the net debt here. And you can take that and divide it by the net capital, okay? And do exactly the same kind of thing. And look how easy these formulas become when we use the net capital to compute, and whenever we have the cost of capital and anything else, and then finally you can do it down here. The formulas, I'm just subtracting and going the other way, and whatever. So you just put here, and you've kind of proved that Hamada stuff. I know my video was too long. I was told by somebody who has no business telling me this kind of stuff that your videos should never be more than 10 or 15 minutes. That's like saying a tweet. That's like I'm not swearing. That's like saying you can solve foreign policy in a tweet. You know what I'm talking about. Some things require a little thought. I'll get off that subject in a minute. Sorry about that. Okay? But that's the beta of equity and the beta of debt. Now, when you apply the WACC method, you get a little bit different. But the problem is, here's the problem. You need to start with this method. That's the big problem. You need to start here because this stays constant and this doesn't. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. Okay? And that's our first. Now, what I'm going to do is make a sensitivity table. And to make a sensitivity table, here's what I started with. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it two of them. And this one I'm going to fill in. Now, there's an exercise in this as part of my marketing strategy, as if you care. I'm going to start marketing because I'm making zero on this stupid website. I'm making zero. So I'm going to start marketing to your boss and tell your boss that if you watch a bunch of videos and prove that you do that, you should get a KPI. What's a KPI? A key performance something or other. You should get credited with watching the videos. Now, let's pretend we see the cost of debt. Then we can say, well, this is pre-tax, the cost of debt. Then I can say, well, okay, the net of tax debt is the pre-tax debt times 1 minus the tax rate. And then the net of tax equity is just the debt minus. That's kind of what we just did. I think that's this thing up here. Okay, that's our adjusted capital structure right here. Okay, and then you can say, well, okay, the tax effect of the debt is this. So when I go back to the gross method, I need to say, well, the equity went up. So I take the equity to capital with the net method and increase the denominator, which makes the equity to capital look a little bit less in this one. Okay, and then we can take 1 minus that and get the debt. Now I put some beta on debt, which again is totally unrealistic, and beta on unlevered. I just pretended for some reason we know the unlevered beta. Then the beta on the equity is just the net, not the gross. It's the net. It's the net. It's the net. I can't say that enough. So we take the beta on the unlevered minus the beta on the debt times the the debt to capital net, and then we get the cost of equity is the same thing. We get the beta on the equity times the equity market premium plus RF and all that stuff. And then we can get the cost of equity and prove that so I did this with different capital structures and prove that they always give the same thing. Now, I'm going to do the same thing. Let me check how we're doing. Only 10 minutes, good. I'm going to do the same thing here, and this time I'm going to say, well, okay, let's say that I have, I just took those gross numbers. Those are what you see on the balance sheet, not on the balance sheet, but on the market balance sheet. Let me do this. So if I have the debt like this, I can say, well, let's take that debt and multiply it by the tax rate. Okay, that's this basically stated on a cost on a percentage basis. That's the 600 times this. That's the tax effect of the debt. If I put, if I take this number times the tax rate, that gives me 240. That's the tax. And if I take that divided by the all equity cost of capital, I get like a 19%. Now, I got 21%. I think well, whatever. Let me do this. I'm just going to show you the calculation. I didn't explain this. This is criminal. But I take the tax effect of the debt, and then I adjust the equity. We want the net equity capital. So to get the net equity capital, we take that's why I multiplied it by the, sorry, I made a mistake on purpose. It's the debt times this. Okay, sorry about that. And then we take the equity that we see and divide it by 1 minus this. That gives us and there's our 64% again. And then we take 1 minus that to get our debt. Now, you can probably do this 100 different ways. Then our beta on the equity is the beta on the debt times this net amount plus the beta, it's the unlevered beta minus the beta on the debt times this debt amount, and then we have to take this whole thing, and we divide it by the equity to capital, the net capital structure. That's what we get. And then our cost of equity is the beta of the equity multiplied by the equity market risk premium plus the beta on plus the risk-free rate. And the cost of the debt is the beta, which is my next subject, times the equity market risk premium plus the beta. I hate doing this because it's so wrong. And then the overall cost of capital is the beta on the equity times the equity to capital plus the debt cost times the debt capital. That's all net. Now our WACC is a little different. Our WACC, we take the cost of debt times 1 minus the tax rate. That's what you normally do. Plus times, of course, the gross debt to capital, plus the equity, which that's the same in both cases, times the equity to capital that we see. And then we can this is my Shift Control C. It works down if you use some kind of other thing than the mouse. What a waste. I'm not anti-mouse, I told you. And then I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? Oh, this tax, I forgot to press the F4 here. Sorry about that. Okay, and then what happens is we get the same cost of unlevered capital, but our WACC started at the 100% debt to capital the same, but our WACC changes. And that's exactly what was happening in this page of it. Okay? All right. And now let me see the time. I think I'm gonna stop this video because I get all nervous because of all these rules about how long you should make a video. I have to keep my tweets to, a certain number of characters, and I try to explain complicated things in a few minutes, or in the new world, people won't pay attention to it. And if you have an idea like this that you can explain with a clear head, there's a clear head. This is the kind of stuff that they take hundreds of pages of gobbledygook formulas to do, and it comes clear. You can prove it with a nice little Excel sheet. You can prove these things and and then anybody who starts to argue with you, you have to walk them through this sheet. Sorry about that. Goodbye.